Today we're going to be talking about how we do the data processing for the Save Warrior None campaign. The reason we want to go through this is so that you can get a sense of what's happening on the back end to create the charts that you see every day in the newsletter and some of the research that we do to advance the campaign. Now, to start, we need to talk about data and where we can get the data from. For things like tweets, we have to go and get that data from a bunch of different places. One of those places is from Twitter itself. Twitter has what are called APIs, Application Programming Interfaces. And an API allows a piece of software, some code, to connect to it and extract data from it. So here, for example, is a list of files. We have a piece of software running on a server out in the cloud that is extracting information from Twitter every 5 minutes, right? That's why there's so many files here. And what we get is actual data, the usernames, the hashtags, all this stuff from Twitter. And we have to collect this because there are periods of time during the day where there's just so much volume that we need to collect it every 5 minutes. So that's one of the first sources. And we use, again, some external servers to collect this data. The second source is what are called JSON files. And so there's a type of tool called a scraper that basically goes onto a website and just reads the site as though it were a human being doing it. And the reason we use this tool with Twitter is that not all of the tweets that happen get caught by the Twitter API, particularly on very busy periods of time. For example, when people are celebrating, say, the 10 million tweet mark. And there were periods of time when Twitter's API just crashed because the current management seems to enjoy doing testing of their software in production, on the live website. And so we have scraping software to help fill in those gaps. Plus, when these systems first went online on around January 10th, the campaign had already been in motion for about a month at that point. So using scraping tools allow us to go back in time to December 13th, when the show cancellation was announced, to pick up that data. The third place we go for data is through software. This is a piece of software called Talkwalker. Now, there are some software packages like these APIs that get you granular data, but processing a lot of granular data very quickly takes a long time, right? As of today, the day we're recording this, which is just about 9 weeks, 10 weeks after the campaign got started, there's over 9,000 Twitter files to go through. And obviously, to create charts in a timely manner, we don't have time to go through all of those. So we use services like Talkwalker. Our first stop is to get the news stories of the day. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to restrict this down to 3 months. We're going to choose news, newsletter, blogs, and podcasts, and go and get the verbatims. The verbatims are the actual URLs for the news stories themselves. And our first step here is to just export all the data. We're not going to do any of the analysis in the software itself because it takes some time and there's a lot of stories. So that's our first step, is to get that data exporting so that we can start processing it. Next, we're going to go ahead and start getting some of the dailies. Now, as of the day that we're recording this, there are no phrases of the day this week. Let me show you some examples of what that has looked like in the past. We have, Super Raccoon, the Spanish phrases, Paramount Save Warrior None. So we have some of these saved phrases as well. Our current phrases are the 10 million mark, which we just hit not too long ago. And of course the bananas one, which is interesting. We're going to go ahead and export this data. So every day we have to export the previous day's phrases, plus the last 3 or 4 days worth usually. And then we want to take a look at the big hashtag itself, which is of course the primary hashtag. We actually have several versions of this in here to account for the various misspellings that have happened over time. So people who have substituted letters, added letters, done little things. We try and capture the most common variations so we get a true sense of how large this is. Let's go ahead and turn forecasting off because it's almost never right in this particular context. This is not a repeatable, predictable event, so forecasting is not a good choice here. And this information now is, these are the daily Twitter numbers. These all get exported to CSV, or comma-separated value files. These files then get put into directories on a local machine for processing. So let's go ahead and get that going here. And move. So we have our news stories, which is one folder. Let's get rid of the previous day's news stories, so we don't need them. Clean up a little bit here. And now we go into our phrase data, and we can get rid of the last 2 days because we're going to move in our big phrases and our individual phrases. So now we've got the raw components for making reports. Our next step is to open up our reporting software to generate these reports. And there's 4 different files to do this. 2 of the files process the API data as well as the JSON data that we talked about earlier and create consolidated files of that data. So that's what this processing file does, and then the actual making of the reports. The other 2 process the Talkwalker data specifically. So let's go ahead and run this one. And these run programmatically. I'm showing you within the programming interface so that you can see the bits and pieces as they operate. But for the most part, these run pretty autonomously. You can see all those files that we were looking at assembled here. It looks like we've got an anomaly there in folder 9. So we should try to take a look at that and see what's going on there. Something does not look right. Nope, folder 9 is correct. And then let's go ahead and process the news stories. What's happening behind the scenes is that these pieces of software are processing all the data and they're making reports. So they're manufacturing the reports behind the scenes in graphical format. The other thing that these pieces of software do is they update our master spreadsheets. So one of the things that we do at the campaign is we try to make sure that everybody has access to the information. So this spreadsheet is populated every single day whenever these scripts run, whenever these programs run. New stuff is, anything that's in here previously is overwritten, and these new pieces are pushed in. This way, everybody's working from the same data, and everyone has access to the data in the interest of transparency. So we've now done the processing of the data. Let's go ahead and take a look at the outputs. So to begin with, we have our news headlines. So from the main news report, we have these are the headlines. These go into the newsletter itself. So the daily Substack, when you see those articles where we're asking you to click on things, that's where this comes from. This is programmatically generated from here. Before the 10 million mark, we actually had a piece of software that would tell you how many tweets were left until the 10 million mark. That obviously has long passed, so that's no longer useful. And then each of the major charts that are generated show up in here. So there's our 10 million mark, this chart. And these charts are produced in 2 formats. PNG, the Portable Network Graphics chart, which is what's in the newsletter. And then SVG charts, which are Scalable Vector Graphics charts. These go to the design teams for being made into nicer looking charts. We also do data exports from these files as well. So from the individual tweets, we can look for people who have maybe their TikTok handle in their Twitter bios, and we can hand that off to outreach teams to reach out to those folks. We also have in here the verbatims, the news articles in data format. And we even have some things like the distinct number of participating users, which is the number of unique users that have been using the hashtag each day. Again, this is all data that is from those individual tweets, so from the JSON file and the API. And we use this to judge how active the campaign is. You know, how many people are participating. Right now, we're in actually a rest period. And surprisingly, for the last few days, even though we're in a rest period, there's still about 3,000 hardcore folks who decided rest is for you can rest when you're dead, I guess, because they're still tweeting like crazy. So this was a long tour of the infrastructure that is fueling the reporting behind the Save Warrior None campaign, the daily data. These reports run once or twice a day, depending on need. and is what goes into the newsletter, is what goes onto the websites, is what goes into the various Discord channels so that people can see what's happening with the campaign. If you've got comments or questions about this, please leave them just right in the comments below. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon.